This is going to be a brief video on how to use the AgSense app. So the way we'll do that is we'll locate the app on our phone, and you can download the app from the Google Play Store or Apple, the Apple App Market, and just type in AgSense, AgSense, and then look up. The app will look like this right here, the AgSense app. So when we log in, we'll go back and we kind of get the same kind of list view. We only get a list view on the app. We don't get a farm view on the map. So when you log in, this is what it'll look like. And as you can see, we've got our pivots, and then we've got our crop links, which is where we're using to start and stop the pumps. So kind of a brief rundown. We click on John, behind John's pivot, and the data will load. And you get there, no warnings. There's no start scheduled, and there are no stops pending or scheduled. The status is the power's off. The pivot is sitting at 328 degrees. The percent timer is 0 because the pivot's not moving. The end gun's off. Pivot's idle. 0 pressure at the end of the pivot. There's no rainfall because there's not a rain bucket attached there. And end gun 2 is off because we're not using end gun 2. So to do a start for this pivot, we're really not going to be able to do much because the power's off, but we would click on the start button, which is right here. We would click on the start button, we would select our direction in forward or reverse, and we would tell the machine whether we wanted to wait for pressure before the pivot starts to move. And if we're dry walking the pivot, we wouldn't care about it, we'd leave it like that. But if we were going to start the pivot irrigating, we would tell it to wait for pressure, and therefore when the pivot starts, it will not move until water pressure is reached at the end of the pivot. So that's what that does. And then as we work our way down, pump 1 behind John pump valve. It is set to full auto so that when we start the pivot, the pump will start and the valve will open, and vice versa. When the pivot stops, the pump will shut down and the valve will close. We can see the house fill pump valve, and like I said, it would be set to manual on this page because we're not using it from this page. It's not tied. That relay is not tied to this pivot. The actual crop link box is, but this actual relay, we're not wanting to control it with this pivot. We could, but we're not. Stopping slot. You can set multiple stopping slots, and you can use it to do that once, to where if we put 180 right here and turned it on, it would either stop there once or it would always stop there, and vice versa. We could set multiple stopping slots. Auto reverse is, it says it is disabled on this page because we're not using, we don't have it set to auto reverse, but we could set it to be persistently to always auto reverse when it's going forward at an angle and reverse at an angle. So you can set that up here as well. Our speed, if we left it on panel speed, it would run the speed that the panel says is set to, or we can run a flat rate to where if we wanted to put out a half an inch, we could either, if we had our chart in our hand, we could type in the percent that correlates to a half an inch, or we could just put in 0.50 right there and it would calculate the speed. And then a VRI table, if you had set up variable rate tables, you could select which table you wanted to run. So you'll mainly use the flat rate most all the time by just selecting a percent or a depth and running it at that desired rate. End gun tables, we can either choose always on, always off, or we can use a table. And I've got table 1 selected here because I just turned it on here and off here, and it's just going to be on the whole way behind John's. So where I've got it set to run table 1. You could, from the web page, you could go back and adjust tables and create your own tables, and then select which table you wanted to run. We're not, as we keep working down, we're not using end gun 2. We're not using auto restart. And our pressure is 0.0 pounds right now because we're not irrigating. And if we had any notes, or if we wanted to add a note, we could do that from this down here. We could hit the little notes button. But as you went through and selected your commands, a list, it would say like 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, either 5 commands would be listed right here, and you would you would swipe up from right here. Then you would have the option to send commands or not send commands. So once you get your pivot selected like you wanted to, You would swipe up from the bottom and hit send commands. There are no commands to send, but you could either, it would list those commands here. And then we could either send or don't send. So that's how you would start and stop the pivot from the app. We can go back to the list view and the house field. If you wanted to look at it, as you can see, like we talked about the valves before, it also lists the valve and the pump for behind John's, and on this page it's set to manual, and on this page it's set to full auto. So that's I wouldn't play with those too much. Same thing with that one. So we can go back to our list view, and the 3558 pivot has a rain bucket on it, and it is active now. It wasn't active before this morning, but now it is. And if we wanted to look at rainfall, we would scroll down to the bottom and we would see our rainfall. A 12-hour rainfall, a 24-hour rainfall, and then a accumulated yearly rainfall. And this is a good place we can look at the notes. So if there was any notes, they would show up under here, or you could add a note. Name your note and add it. So we won't do that. So that's kind of a little rundown on the app. What else can we look at? The same little charts that were available on the web page are also available with the app here. We can kind of look at some of that same information, and then also at the other tab we can look at a list of commands. Go back to the list view. So that's kind of a rundown on the app.